Thank you. Our next speaker is a friend of Uganda, Mr. Eric Chinje. He's the CEO of Africa Media Initiative, and he has been a driving force behind media development initiatives. His extensive experience includes senior advisory roles at KRL International. He will talk about that. He ran as strategic communications at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, providing him with unique perspective for our discussions. Mr. Chinje spent over 16 years at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., where he served as the bank's spokesperson on African affairs and held managerial positions, including director of the World Bank Institute Global Media Development Program. He also led the Africa Region Strategic Communications, supervising a team of over 80 communications professionals in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Chinje notably served as Director of External Affairs and Communications at the Africa Development Bank from 2004 to 2008. He has been a correspondent for renowned media outlets such as CNN World Report, BBC World Service, Voice of America, among others. His accomplishments have earned him many prestigious honors, and his expertise will undoubtedly enrich our conference discussions. Allow me to welcome Mr. Eric Chinje. Yes. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure why, of all Africans, 1 billion of us, I got called up to speak to you today. Not exactly sure why. I think it's because I come from a country that is very similar to Uganda. The president of Cameroon, Mr. Paul Biya, has been president for 41, almost 42 years. And I have known him and worked with him prior to leaving Cameroon. And I have watched, I've been out of the country for over 30 years now, and I've watched Cameroon from a distance. I go there all the time. I was in Cameroon last week. In my work, and I'm trying to tell you why I'm here. In my work, I've had to interact with a lot of African leaders, going back to Mobutu Sese Seko, whom I worked with, and he came to trust, if you would believe it, all the way to Sylvie Johnson, and I mention her because she's a woman, the first elected female president in Africa. And a host of them. The last one I worked with was Eric, my namesake, of Botswana, President Masisi. The reason I say this is to, I hope, convince you that I'm qualified to speak. You never know. But you know, I have also taken the time to reflect on the African condition. Why are we not succeeding? Why is this continent of 1 billion+ people, with all the natural resources that it has, why is it not working? There's got to be a problem. It can't, you know, I've tried to blame God, but that's not good enough. I think if it's God's fault, he must have a reason, and the challenge for us is to find that reason and maybe pray for it to change, because I hear that God hears prayers. So something is not happening. Something is not right.
I've sat in this room and heard you all charged up by Dr. Daniels, or Professor Daniels, the one who spoke before me. I've heard that. And I could see the emotional charge in this room. And I've seen emotional charges across the continent. And nothing is changing. You've got to take a step back. You cannot do the same things over and over and expect a different results. You all know that. You've got to take a step back. Why is Mr. Biya in Cameroon there for 40 years? I'm here with my sister, Ufi, who's a vice chancellor in one of the universities in Cameroon. So she's high up in the system. I don't say this so you attack my sister. And we have these exchanges all the time. How does a guy survive in power for that long? And what will it take to change the dynamics of things in the country? I'm hoping that in the next few minutes I'll be able to convince you to take that step back, rethink a few things, and do what is necessary to move your country forward. And I know Uganda will not move forward, just as much as Cameroon will not move forward, as long as these people are there, the Musevenis and the Biyas of the world. I don't say that to, again, charge you emotionally. No. I say that because I want you guys to take that step back and think. I was looking at Uganda. And looking at this country that has such wealth, agricultural wealth. What is happening? How much of your agricultural produce are transformed in Rwanda, in Uganda? I was looking at the tourism industry. You have one of the most beautiful countries on the continent. What innovations have taken place in the last 30 years to ensure that Uganda becomes the touristic heaven and actually attracts people? Because it's when tourists come that a tourism industry has meaning. What have you done to attract them? What have you done in manufacturing and processing foods and other things? And there are all of these sectors. You're one of the countries they're talking about, and it's maybe the reason Museveni wants to stick around, because of the oil that has been discovered. Think about who is exploiting that oil and what they're doing about it. And if you go the way most African countries have gone, you will not have a petrochemical industry, which should be the natural next step from producing oil. No country, not even Nigeria, with all the oil it produces, not even Angola, has a petrochemical industry. Why are you guys not thinking ahead and preparing for that? Because if you do not, and this is maybe the most important point I want to make, if you do not create wealth in that country, if you do not create wealth and distribute wealth, you're not going to make a single difference in your country. So what you should all be focusing on is how do we create wealth in Uganda? Bobby Wine should be talking about that over everything else. Even if it means, Museveni would steal those ideas. He'll steal them, but he'll do nothing with them, because the endemic corruption will not allow him to do anything with those ideas. So think about it. How do we create wealth in Uganda? And you'll create wealth based on what you already have. That's the irony. Look, I started off by saying maybe we should ask God. If you ask God, he would laugh and tell you to go back and sit where you are. Because he would say, I've given you everything it takes to create the wealth you need to create. And if you don't do that, your country is not going to move forward. So look at each of your regions in the country. Look at all, whether you're in Western Uganda, in East, in the center, wherever. There are very specific things you have that you can work on to generate revenue and make life better for citizens. That's what this is all about. If you cannot make life better for the majority of citizens, your politics is, just nonsense. So I'm hoping that you all, my one message is the NUP should move away from the politics of politicians. Move away from that. Because in country after country after country, we hear that. I sat for coffee with President Masisi just when he was campaigning. He was not sure of winning because his predecessor was against him. Masisi of Botswana. We sat for coffee, and there were two of us. He sat on the floor, and I was like, wow, this guy, he's the president, because he was campaigning whilst president. Instead of sitting on the comfortable seats I was sitting in, he said, no, I want to relax, and he sat on the floor, and I was looking, my God, this is a different guy. And when we spoke, what I'm telling you now was the kind of discussion I had with this man. And I was so confident that finally there's an African leader who will be different, who will, he's inheriting a fairly good economy, Botswana. And I thought he would just move it to the highest heights. And he turned out to be, from what I'm told, I've not been back because of the disappointment. Corruption, his family is wealthy, they are the ones who control the wealth of the country. And as I said, if you cannot think of how you create and distribute wealth, you'll just be like the rest of them. If Bobby Wine, if he doesn't think about that and build a program around that, he'll be like the rest of them. Doesn't matter how excited you all are about him. I have to clap for the guy who started the clapping. You know why? Because you understand what I'm saying. You understand where I'm trying to go with this. It's not about the emotionalisms of the moment. That's not what we need. As I said earlier, I am involved with a group of, there are under 10 of us, about 6, in Cameroon, rethinking that country. We are rethinking Cameroon, coming up with ideas that we will inject into the social discourse in that country, in the hope that by the time Mr. Biya leaves, and we hope it's in another year or two, we will have the ideas we need to build our economy and to build our country. And I'll tell you where we're starting. We've come to the conclusion, my little group, and we're going to propose this to the nation, to citizens. We've come to the conclusion that the first thing you want to focus on as a government is health. The health sector. And that everything you do should depart from health and reinforce the health of citizens. Health. Your economy should be a health-oriented economy. Your tourism, everything you do should be health-oriented. Your agriculture, think about this. If the wealth you generated in the agricultural sector had at the base of it the preservation and the promotion of the health of citizens, They'll eat well. They will, children will be born knowing that they can worry about everything, but not about their health. Once your health is guaranteed, you become dynamic, strong, forward-looking, because you don't have, even this country, America doesn't have that. This country doesn't have that. So you'd even be different. Health as the basis of all government action. Maybe you want to start thinking about that. Think about all the things you can do in all the sectors of the economy, in all areas of wealth creation, if you departed from the fact that every Ugandan will be guaranteed health from the day they are born. Think about that. And then as you go from there, in our countries, we were told, you're born, you're trained, you work, and then you retire. The group I'm working with, we've decided we're going to tell citizens, no more retirement. We will retire the word retirement. Why? Because we've agreed amongst ourselves that when a child is born, education starts in the family. The first 6 years, 7 years, in the family. So we have to organize our societies in ways that allow families to train the children who are born. What are the ideas that we generate? What do we tell them to do to support those children in their early years? And then beyond that, it's formal education, primary, secondary, post-secondary schools. And then beyond that, it's the professional training, and you're moving into the professions. So the state is constantly organized in a way that will support this child who's been born, this individual. You're born, you're trained in the family, you're trained in schools, you're trained in the institutions, you get into professional life, and then think about this. By the time you are out of professional life and you're being told you must go on retirement, that's when you are the most enriched individual, the most enriched citizen, because of all the education and experiences that you now combine. So at 60 is when you should be, I'm not saying that because I'm 60 and beyond, but at 60 is when you can give the most to your country. So your country should organize itself to tap into that energy instead of throwing you out to go on retirement. Think about that. I know that the people who clapped for me were those who are 60 or in that neighborhood. But this is the truth. We've got to think differently. That's the challenge of Africa today. We've got to think differently. I worked for the World Bank for 20 years. I worked for the African Development Bank in senior positions for 5. And I worked in my country. And I came to realize that the ideas that they ship to us are not the ideas that we need necessarily. They'll never tell you. Uganda got suspended the other day by the World Bank. I know a lot of people were happy about it. I was, but for a different set of reasons. I was because you don't need aid. Uganda does not need aid. Like I tell even my own country, Cameroon, we don't need aid. There's enough wealth in the land to generate and take care of everything we need. Our infrastructure building, the innovations we need, buying the technologies that we need, providing the hospitals and the schools and so on. There is enough money in the land to get all of that if we organized ourselves. So, Mr. Bobby Wine and the supporters of this young man, for whom I have so much respect, please help him be different. Help him be different. It's not your emotional charge that's going to make him different. No. It's your ability to take a step back and say, look, if we're going to be different, we have to come up with different set of ideas. We've got to think differently about who we are. We've got to think differently about that child who's just been born, about the citizen that that child will become. You've got to think differently about that. And if you do, you may help that child become the citizen of a state that provides leadership to Africa. Uganda has the ability to do that, you know. Uganda can do that. You're the pearl of Africa, aren't you?